My name is Mrs. Lorraine Jacobs, 56 years old. For 30 years I've taught gospel singing at a small church in Atlanta, where every Sunday morning begins with the same ritual: a cup of black coffee, the smell of lemon polish from my piano, and the radio tuned to Sunday soul rising. That morning, the announcer said, "Here's a new track sweeping through Texas. Lie Sweetly, a duet by Henry Jacobs and Chloe May." The cup slipped from my fingers before I could breathe. The sound of it cracking on the tile was sharp enough to slice the air. Then came his voice, low, gravel soft, climbing to that trembling falsetto I'd know anywhere. "When you lie, lie sweetly, the Lord won't hear the truth." I froze. Every syllable hit me like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I had taught that man how to find his breath, how to pray through a melody instead of over it. And now that same breath was wrapping itself around words that belonged to me. 3 years ago, Henry had packed his Bible, kissed my forehead, and said he was leaving for a mission trip to Texas. He promised he'd send recordings of the choir he was training there. After the first month, the calls stopped coming. I told everyone he was busy doing God's work, but the song pouring through my radio wasn't recorded in a church. I could hear studio reverb, the soft hiss of a condenser mic. The one model I'd saved up for back when we were still building our dream. Jacob's Sound Ministry. He'd sworn he'd never use my compositions without asking. Yet here it was, my melody stripped of its prayer, dressed up for applause. The young woman's voice, bright, careless, slid between his verses like perfume over dust. She laughed between takes. I could hear it, faintly, the kind of laughter that doesn't belong in a hymn. And beneath it all, Henry's breath quickened, syncing with hers. That was when my own pulse faltered. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." But it wasn't. I could picture every gesture, his hand tapping the mic stand, his jaw tilting toward the high note. The man I used to correct on Sunday afternoons was now performing my song beside someone half my age on the very stage I once dreamed we'd share. A rush of heat crawled up my neck. I turned the radio off, but his voice kept echoing inside my skull, the same way a bell keeps ringing after it's struck. The silence that followed was worse. It felt like betrayal had a sound, and I'd just turned the volume down on it. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone when it lit up with a notification. NEW release, Henry Jacobs and Chloe. My, Lie Sweetly. The album cover showed him in a white suit, smiling the way he hadn't smiled for me in years. In the corner, tiny print. Written by Henry Jacobs. I laughed, a sharp broken thing, the kind of laugh that tastes like metal. 10 years ago I wrote that song in my journal after one of our worst arguments, when he lied about a tour deposit that never existed. I played it once for him, late at night, whispering the chorus while he half slept beside me. He said, "That's too sad for the Lord's house." I never sang it again. Now the world was streaming it on Spotify. I walked to the window. The magnolia tree outside was blooming early, heavy with white petals. The air smelled sweet, but I couldn't tell if it was spring or rot. "You stole my song," I said out loud. "You stole my voice." The piano in the corner reflected my face like a dark mirror. I reached out, pressed one key middle C, and the sound wavered, thin, like a throat after crying too long. That was when I felt the first crack inside me. Not anger yet, just the quiet knowledge that something sacred had been taken. And if he could take my music, what else had he already taken? I sat back down, the radio still humming static. Somewhere between those fuzzy frequencies, his voice rose again for the final chorus. And in that moment, I could hear it clearly. The shift in his breath, the new rhythm in his phrasing. I'd spent decades teaching choirs how to feel the pulse of grace, but Henry's pulse no longer matched mine. It was lighter, faster, carried by someone else's timing. And I knew then, someone else was keeping the beat of his heart. I met Henry Jacobs when I was 24, at the St. Helena Church Choir. He played the drums badly at first, but he had rhythm in his smile. I was the soloist then, the girl everyone said had a voice made of Sunday light. He said I sang like a prayer that forgot to end. Back then, I still believed talent was a form of faith. If you worked hard enough, God would pay the bills. He didn't. I did. Henry and I married 2 years later in the same chapel where we met. The choir sang "How Great Thou Art," and I remember thinking, yes, he must be great, to give me a man who makes music out of my silence. We honeymooned in the church basement, counting coins from the wedding envelopes. He wanted studio time, I wanted groceries. We compromised. We starved a little. When he said, "I need real equipment if I'm going to sound professional," I took a second job teaching voice at the community center. For 3 months, I saved every tip from every kid who wanted to sing like Whitney Houston. The total came to $1,200, exactly the price of the silver microphone Henry had circled in the catalog. I handed it to him on our first anniversary. "So the world can finally hear you," I said. He kissed my forehead. "When my first album drops, I'll pay you back double." I waited for that album, the way some women wait for a child that never comes. The studio bills arrived instead. Thick envelopes stamped "Past DU." I mowed lawns on weekends, cleaned pews at the church after rehearsals, and told myself it was our dream, not my debt. Henry called it investing in destiny. But destiny had an appetite. It ate through our savings, our patience, even our Sunday dinners. I remember the first time I heard him sing better than ever, right after a deacon's wife told him he had a voice smoother than sin. That night, he came home glowing, full of stories about fans who wanted to back him. "Lorraine, when people believe in you, the notes come easy," he said. "Then why don't you ever sing that way with me?" I asked. He smiled, tired and distant. "Because you already believe too much." That was Henry, charming, hungry, and terrified of mediocrity. He needed admiration like oxygen. When the applause faded, so did he. The silver microphone became our marriage's third partner. It stood in the middle of our living room, mounted on a tripod like a shrine. Every Sunday night I'd polish it, the way some wives polish wedding silver. When the church lights went out after choir practice, I'd see my reflection on its curved head, my lips moving silently beside his. We never had children. He said music was enough. I said silence was too much. Instead, we built a small studio in the back of the house. Foam panels, tangled wires, hope. He recorded demos that never left the hard drive, chasing perfection like a ghost he could almost touch. I'd bring him dinner at midnight, the smell of fried okra and fatigue following me in. Sometimes he'd forget to eat. Sometimes he'd forget to thank me. I told myself genius required sacrifice. I just didn't know I was the offering. The first real crack appeared the night of the gospel revival contest. I had arranged the harmonies, trained the choir, even stitched the costumes. Henry was supposed to drum. At the last minute, he grabbed a mic and took the solo. When the audience stood to cheer, he looked right past me. Afterward, people came up saying, "Your husband's incredible. You must be proud." I smiled until my cheeks hurt, then went to the parking lot and sat in the car with the engine off. That was when I learned applause can sound like betrayal if it skips your name. Still, I stayed. Because in every marriage, someone hums the melody and someone keeps time. I told myself I was the rhythm steady, unseen, essential. Until one night, I found the receipt for another microphone. He'd bought it with the savings from our church lessons. "You already have one," I said. "That's yours," he replied. "This one's mine." It sounded small at the time, but that sentence built a wall between us. From then on, the silver mic stayed mostly in its case. He said it didn't suit his tone anymore. I kept polishing it anyway, every Friday, like a ritual. The metal cooled my palms, and I'd whisper small prayers over it. Not for fame, not even for forgiveness, just that someday, the sound of his voice would mean home again. But home changed shape. Henry started traveling with revival groups, never naming who hired him. He'd come back smelling of hotel soap and someone else's perfume. Sweet, powdery, expensive. When I asked, he laughed. "Lorraine, you think too much. Gospel doesn't cheat." I wish I'd believed that. The last photo we took together sits on my piano. Him holding that silver mic, me in the background, out of focus. He looks like the star. I look like the echo. Sometimes, when the afternoon light hits the glass, his smile flickers, the way a candle does before it goes out. That microphone still stands on my desk, its metal cool as regret. Every week I wipe it clean, though I no longer know why. Maybe to prove I still remember the woman who bought it, even if the man who sang into it forgot her. I used to think music was our covenant with God. Now I know it was our contract with ambition. And ambition, once it gets a taste of applause, never goes back to whispering prayers. I never imagined that one day that same silver microphone would betray me. Not by breaking, but by playing back the sound of my own faith being stolen. There was one night that used to live inside me like a small, steady light. It was winter-thin snow covering the steps outside St. Helena Hospital. The church had sent a few of us to sing for the cancer ward. I remember the sterile smell of bleach, the hum of the fluorescent lamps, the soft shuffle of nurses moving like ghosts. Henry carried his drumsticks in his back pocket, tapping them against the elevator wall in rhythm to his heartbeat. "We don't need perfection tonight," he whispered. "Just honesty." When we stepped into the ward, every patient wore the same pale gown, every face tinted with the same faint hope that someone still remembered them. We sang Amazing Grace. I took the lead. Henry stood beside me, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder, keeping time with the other. By the second verse, his voice joined mine. It wasn't polished or showy then. It was raw, cracked in places, trembling at the edges like it knew pain personally. When he sang, "I once was blind," he turned and looked at me. Something passed through that gaze like a confession without words. It wasn't love, not exactly. It was recognition, the kind you feel when you see someone else carrying the same weight you thought only you knew. And in that moment, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the strange peace that came when two broken people believed they could make beauty out of their cracks. The patients clapped softly, some humming along, some too weak to raise their hands. After the song, a little boy tugged at my sleeve. His head was bald from treatment. "Miss," he said, "you sing like you already met heaven." I smiled, and Henry squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. That night, driving home, the city lights blurred through the windshield like falling halos. He said, "Lorraine, if music can heal like that, maybe we're supposed to spend our lives doing it." I nodded. I wanted to believe that was our calling, that faith had chosen us, not the other way around. I remember resting my head on his shoulder, hearing the hum of the tires beneath the gospel station. Every song on the radio sounded softer after that night, like the world itself was breathing in harmony. We recorded our first duet a month later, right there in our living room. The silver microphone stood between us like a promise. The tape hissed quietly before the music began, his drum tapping, my voice trembling with too much feeling. I still have that recording somewhere in a box labeled, "Before the Noise." Back then, Henry hadn't learned how applause could intoxicate. He only cared that I was singing with him. He'd close his eyes when I hit the high notes, like he trusted me to take him somewhere he couldn't go alone. Those were the years I thought grace meant harmony. Two voices blending until you couldn't tell which was which. Now I know. Sometimes harmony is just one person lowering herself so the other can sound divine. Looking back, I can see the small signs that our faith was already fraying. After the hospital performance, the pastor printed Henry's photo in the church bulletin. "Brother Jacobs leads souls to song." He forgot to mention I was there. When I teased him about it, Henry kissed my cheek and said, "Let them see what they need to see. We both know who carried the tune." I laughed then. I shouldn't have. That was the first time he learned the world would clap louder when I stayed quiet. For years afterward, whenever I heard "Amazing Grace," I close my eyes and picture that ward. The pale lights, the trembling voices, his hand steady on mine. I'd convince myself that was proof he still had goodness in him. That the man who once made dying children smile couldn't possibly become cruel. But goodness can fade like melody. It lingers in memory long after the instrument has gone out of tune. Now, when that hymn plays, I hear the same line differently. "I once was blind, but now I see." And I think, Maybe I was the blind one all along. Because even in that hospital room, even in that moment of light, Henry's eyes weren't on the patients. They were on the reflection of himself in the metal door, watching the way he looked when people believed. I used to think that night proved music could save us. Now I know. It just postponed the fall. Maybe that's what gospel really is. Not redemption, but rehearsal. A way to pretend we're forgiven long enough to keep singing. Amazing Grace used to make me cry for hope. Now, it makes me cry for everything hope let me overlook. 2 months before that morning when his voice came through my radio, Henry called me out of the blue. I still remember the way his name flashed on the screen. Henry. Texas Mission. The way my heart leapt like it used to before I learned that hope can bruise. "Hey Lorraine," he said, voice warm, rehearsed. "You got a minute?" "Always," I replied. And that was the truth. For him, I always did. He told me he was leading a new outreach project in Houston. "We're recording an album," he said. "All proceeds go to help orphaned kids. I want to make sure they get instruments, lessons, something to hold on to." The words children and music wrapped around my conscience like a hymn. How could I say no? So when he asked for $2,000 just to cover studio costs, I didn't even blink. I wired the money that afternoon, the same way I used to sign church checks. Automatic, faithful. "Thank you, baby," he said softly. "You're still my angel of grace." I smiled through the phone. "Just promise me you'll send me a copy when it's done." "Of course," he said, and hung up before I could hear the doubt in my own voice. After that, the days passed like quiet water. Every time the mail truck came, I half expected a padded envelope with a demo inside. Instead, I got utility bills and flyers from a local car wash. No album. No letter. Not even a postcard. I told myself the post office must have misplaced it. I even called him once just to check. He didn't pick up. Later that night he texted, "Sorry, in session. Love you always." The words "love you" always landed heavy. They used to sound like a vow. Now, they sounded like punctuation, something he added out of habit. Weeks later, one of my former students, Tanya, dropped by to help tidy the church storeroom. She showed me a video on her phone. "Look, Mrs. Jacobs," she said, "this group is going viral. The Orphans." Crazy name, right? But their sound's amazing. I leaned in. The thumbnail showed a young white woman with honey blonde curls, holding a silver microphone. The caption read, "The Orphans, live recording, Dallas." When the video started, I felt the floor tilt. There, behind her, on the drum set, was Henry. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring. The girl introduced the band. "I'm Chloe May, and this is my family. The Orphans." Family. That word hit harder than any cymbal crash. Henry looked younger somehow. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe it was her laughter echoing behind him. He leaned toward her microphone when he harmonized, his smile easy and familiar. That's how he used to look at me when we first started performing together, like the world was just a song we hadn't finished writing yet. I didn't finish watching. I pressed pause, handed Tanya back her phone, and said my throat was dry. When she left, I sat in the empty church and stared at the piano keys until the light through the stained glass turned red. For the first time in years, I prayed. But not for him. I prayed I was wrong. That maybe there was another drummer named Henry Jacobs from Atlanta, with the same silver ring of sweat on his collar, the same uneven tempo on his snare. But even my faith couldn't stretch that far. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept our bank receipts. The last transaction glowed on the page. 2,000. Wire. Transfer. Jacobs. Ministry, Texas. My own handwriting below it. Donation, Orphan Project. The ink looked naive, almost childish. For the first time, I noticed how the J's in his signature curled like a hook. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe I'd just never wanted to see it. The flyer said, "Charity concert for the children, live in Houston." I told myself I was only going to confirm what my heart already knew. Still, I bought a bus ticket, wore a plain gray coat, and pulled a baseball cap low enough to hide my face. I told the driver I was visiting family. Maybe that wasn't a lie. I was, In a way, visiting the ghost of one. The auditorium was small, maybe 200 people. Folding chairs. A cross projected on the back wall. I sat in the last row, near the exit, where the shadows pooled. The stage lights glared gold and white, and the smell of warm plastic and perfume made the air thick. When the announcer introduced them, "Give it up for the orphans," the crowd clacked like they'd just seen salvation. And there he was, Henry. He wore a crisp white suit and the same smile he used to practice in the bathroom mirror before every Sunday service. But what stopped my breath wasn't the suit. It was what he held. The silver microphone. My wedding gift. The one I'd scrubbed clean for years, even when it stopped singing back to me. He held it like a relic, as if it had always belonged to him. The band started a soft organ, intro, slow, deliberate. Then she appeared. Chloe May. 23, maybe younger, with curls so bright they caught the light like flames. She took the stage barefoot, her smile rehearsed, her innocence weaponized. The crowd leaned forward. I leaned back. Henry whispered something to her before the first verse. She laughed, the sound sharp and sweet, cutting through the air like a bell. Then she began to sing. Her voice wasn't perfect, it was thin, shaky, but he filled in the spaces around it. He matched her breath, guided her phrasing, lifted her every note. It was the same way he used to sing with me. And then came the part that broke me clean in half. He turned to the audience, still holding her hand, and said into the mic, "This young woman taught me what it means to sing from the heart." The crowd cheered. Chloe covered her face, pretending to blush. Henry kissed her hand and bowed like a savior in love. My stomach clenched, not because he touched her, but because he said she taught him. As if I had never existed. As if decades of lessons, arguments, tears, and bills were erased by one girl with a smile and a hashtag. I stared at the microphone, glinting under the stage lights. That was my name engraved on the base, LJ. No one in that room could see it, but I could. He sang the next verse alone, eyes closed, body swaying, voice dripping with the kind of soul that comes only when a man feels admired. The crowd rose to their feet, phones flashed, hands reached up as if to touch heaven, and all I could think was, that sound, that praise, was built on my silence. I didn't clap. I couldn't. My palms were slick with sweat, my heartbeat drowning out the music. The lights flickered across the audience, faces glowing with awe. Nobody knew the song was stolen. Nobody knew the melody was mine. When the final chord rang out, the audience screamed. Chloe bowed. Henry wrapped his arm around her waist, and together they said, "To love, to faith, and to the children who remind us to believe again. Believe again." The words hit me like scripture twisted into mockery. I wanted to stand up, to shout the truth, to tell them he had learned that song beside a woman who used to believe too much. But my throat lopped. The sound in my chest wasn't a sob. It was a hiss, a tearing noise, like the moment a guitar string snaps under too much tension. People around me wiped tears from their eyes, whispering, "That was holy." I almost laughed. If holiness meant erasure, then yes. This was sacred desecration. The crowd surged forward for autographs. I slipped out through the side door, the night air slapping my face like reality. The sky was heavy with heat, the kind that makes you feel you're about to cry even when you don't. I walked a few blocks before I realized I was still clutching my purse so tight my fingers hurt. Inside, I could feel the paper edges of the checkbook I used to send him money. I almost tore it in half right there on the sidewalk. But instead I just whispered into the dark, "He's not a thief." Thieves take what isn't theirs. He took what I gave him and forgot who gave it. A street preacher on the corner was shouting verses through a broken speaker. The wages of sin is death. I didn't stop walking. Because sometimes the death that hurts the most isn't of the body. It's the quiet murder of being rewritten out of your own story. That night, I booked a one-way ticket back to Atlanta. I didn't pack the Silver Mike's twin, the one I used to teach students. I left it on the shelf, dust gathering around it. I couldn't bear to hear my own voice echo anymore. That night, the bus ride back to Atlanta felt endless. The city lights smeared past the window like blurred halos, too far away to touch. I kept replaying his words in my head. She taught me how to sing from the heart. Until they stopped sounding like betrayal and started sounding like permission. Permission to stop believing in him? By the time I got home, it was close to midnight. The house was cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from weather but from absence. The clock on the wall was still ticking, steady and indifferent, as if time itself refused to mourn with me. I dropped my purse on the table, opened my laptop, and stared at the banking tab I hadn't touched in months. His name sat there at the top of the list. Henry Jacobs, monthly transfer. 750. Auto renewal. A rhythm I had kept for 3 years. Like breathing. Like praying. My finger hovered over the cancel button. It should have been easy. But breaking a pattern isn't just about money. It's about silencing the echo that tells you you're only valuable when you're giving. I was the audience, I whispered. And the donor? And the fool. Then I clicked cancel. The confirmation message popped up. Your recurring transfer has been successfully terminated. It felt clinical, almost cruelly small, for something that ended a decade of loyalty. For a second, the room seemed to tilt. No thunderclap, no divine sign. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and my own pulse, finally out of sync with his. I walked to the corner of the living room where the silver microphone still stood on its stand. Its surface caught the dim light, reflecting a warped version of my face, older, thinner, but still alive. I reached out, pulled the cord free, and felt the soft click as it disconnected. That tiny sound felt like a full stop. Then I took a clean cloth and wiped it carefully, circling over the base where our initials were engraved. L and H. The letters looked like they were holding hands. I wiped until the ampersand faded beneath my fingerprints. I found the old glass display box I used to keep for special instruments. Dusty, tucked behind hymn sheets. I placed the microphone inside, closed the lid, and set it on the shelf above the piano. It looked peaceful there, like a body finally laid to rest. Henry, I said softly, from now on, you'll sing without a witness named Lorraine Jacobs. The words didn't come out bitter. They came out clean. Not revenge, not rage, just release. I turned toward the piano and pressed a single key. The sound filled the room. Thin, hesitant, but mine. I opened my old binder of songs, the one with the handwritten lyrics he used to call too personal to sell. The first page was, Lie Sweetly. I hadn't sung it since the night he told me it was too sad for the Lord's house. Maybe it was. But sadness was all I had left to offer, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a sin. I set up my small home mic, the twin of his silver one, and hit record. My hands trembled at first, but when I opened my mouth, something inside me steadied. The melody came out lower, darker than before. No harmony, no second voice trying to correct me. Just breath and truth. When you lie, lie sweetly. Halfway through, my voice cracked, but I kept going. Because this time, the mistake belonged to me. And that made it beautiful. When the last note faded, I sat in silence, hearing the echo bounce off the walls. The recording light blinked red, then stopped. I replayed the track once. Just once. It wasn't perfect, it was honest. It was the first time in years I recognized the woman behind the sound. I didn't delete his music. I didn't burn the albums or throw away the wedding photos. I just let my song play louder. I didn't turn off his music, I whispered. I just turned up mine. And for the first time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt tuned to me. 3 weeks later, his name appeared in my inbox. Subject: Please read this, Lorraine. The email stretched across 4 pages. Long, polished, like a sermon written to save himself. He said he was sorry for how things looked, but that the Lord sometimes calls us to new partnerships. He wrote that Chloe needed a mentor, that he was just helping her grow spiritually. Then came the sentence that stung more than any confession could. I never meant to hurt you, but you have to understand. I'm under a lot of pressure. Pressure. As if betrayal were a byproduct of stress, not choice. as if the vows we made could be rearranged like chords that no longer fit his melody. At the bottom, he signed, "With faith, Henry." No love. No, always. Just faith, the same word he'd worn thin from overuse. That night, I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit in my inbox like an unburied body, a reminder that apologies sometimes rot before they heal. 2 days later, while scrolling through my phone, I saw the photo. Chloe had posted it on her page. Her and Henry kneeling side by side in the recording studio, heads bowed, hands clasped. Her caption read, "Faith and love. When God sends the right partner, everything aligns. Faith and love, blessed." I stared at the image until my eyes blurred. His left hand, the one that used to hold my waist when we sang together, was resting gently on her shoulder. The same hand that had once tuned my breath, guided my voice, steadied my heart. The comments below were full of hearts and hallelujahs. People from our old congregation wrote, "What a godly duo." Another added, "The spirit chose well." The spirit, it seemed, had terrible taste. By the end of the week, whispers had already reached Atlanta. A friend from the choir called to check on me. Her tone was sweet and sticky, pity wrapped in gossip. "People are talking, Lorraine," she said softly. "They say you're just jealous. You know, because Henry found someone new to sing with." I laughed. "Jealous? Well, you know how folks are. They think maybe you couldn't handle being replaced." "Replaced," I repeated, tasting the word like rust. When the call ended, I stood in my kitchen staring at the wall clock, listening to it tick like a metronome for my humiliation. The house had grown unbearably quiet. No footsteps, no laughter, no warm hum of conversation. Just the faint whir of the old cassette player on the shelf, looping one of our old demos. The one where we were still us. His voice blended with mine, still in harmony, still believing. But this time, the sound felt foreign, like listening to strangers who used to live here. I sat in my old teaching chair, hands folded in my lap, and watched the tape spin. The cassette clicked as it rewound to the beginning. Then again. Then again. The machine was doing what I couldn't. Replaying, rewinding, refusing to move on. On the piano, the silver microphone sat sealed in its glass case. The light from the window hit its metal surface, throwing a streak of cold reflection across the room. It looked less like an instrument now, more like evidence. Proof that faith, like sound, can be switched on and off with the flick of a hand. Every evening, I'd catch myself glancing at it, expecting it to hum, to come alive, to deliver some divine verdict. But it stayed silent, gleaming and guilty. Outside, the neighbors' kids rode their bikes, laughing, shouting over one another. Life went on loud, unashamed. Inside, the quiet pressed against my chest until I thought it might break something inside me. I started humming just to fill the air. Not gospel, not hymns, just nonsense melodies, half words and breath. The kind of music that doesn't ask to be heard. The kind of music that keeps a woman company when her faith finally stops answering. Sunday morning. The sky over Atlanta looked bruised, gray clouds pressed low, like heaven itself was holding its breath. I hadn't planned to go back to church, not after the whispers, not after the pitying smiles. But that morning, something in me wanted witnesses. If he had turned faith into theater, then fine. Let the curtain rise. I put on my black choir dress, the one I hadn't worn since he left. The hem still smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. In my purse, I tucked a folded sheet of paper, aged, soft at the edges, but still legible. Lie. Sweetly. Written in my hand. Signed in blue ink. When I reached St. Helena, the parking lot was already full. Cars lined the curb, families chatting, children tugging at their mothers' sleeves. From inside, I could hear the choir warming up, the organ humming the key of E, a bright false joy. I stepped through the doors. Heads turned. People smiled politely, the kind of smiles that ask questions they won't voice. I walked straight down the center aisle. Henry was on stage, microphone in hand, leading the choir like a man born for spotlight. The silver microphone, my gift, shone beneath the stained glass light. When he saw me, the rhythm of his conducting faltered. His hand froze mid-air. "Mrs. Jacobs," the pastor stammered from the pulpit, "what a surprise." "I came to hear the music," I said. The organ stopped. Even the children in the front pew turned silent. Henry cleared his throat. "Lorraine," he began, "maybe we can talk after." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward. "Now is good." My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, deliberate. Each step echoed louder than the last. I stopped halfway down the aisle. The microphone in his hand picked up every sound. I didn't need to shout. "Do you remember who taught you how to sing, Henry?" A ripple of whispers spread across the pews. Chloe, standing behind him with a tambourine, lowered her eyes. "Lorraine," he said, his voice tightening, "we are in the house of God. And God doesn't teach men to steal." The sentence landed like a slap, soft in volume, brutal in meaning. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back whispered, "Lord have mercy." Henry's face flushed. He tried to smile, but it came out twisted. "You're upset," he said. "I understand that, but this isn't the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the place," I replied. "You used his name to take what wasn't yours. So let's return it to him properly." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded paper. The edges were creased, but the ink was still sharp. I held it up for everyone to see. "This," I said, "is the original handwritten copy of Lie Sweetly. The song you've been performing. The one you said you wrote for Chloe." The pastor shifted uncomfortably. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Henry's jaw tightened. "Lorraine, please, don't please me," I said. "You always told me music was sacred. You said it carried truth. So let it speak now." I stepped closer to the stage. The choir stood frozen, hymn book still open mid-page. The microphone squealed slightly as I approached feedback, or maybe protest. "You can borrow my voice," I said, my tone steady. "You can mimic my phrasing, even copy my melody, but you will never sing my pain the way I do." The room went utterly still. You could hear the air conditioner hum. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Henry finally spoke, voice trembling with that old false humility. "I was inspired by you. I never said it was about stealing." "Inspiration doesn't come with forged signatures," I interrupted. "You used my song to build your stage, and then you thanked her for teaching you to sing." He looked out at the audience faces he once charmed, now confused, unsure which hymn to believe. "You think humiliating me helps?" he asked. "I think truth has better acoustics than lies," I said. A murmur rolled through the congregation, agreement mixed with discomfort. The pastor cleared his throat, but no one moved. I reached the front row and laid the paper on the edge of the stage, right beneath his polished shoes. "You can keep singing, Henry," I said softly. "But from now on, every note will have my name beneath it." Chloe tried to step forward. "Mrs. Jacobs," she began, "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said, "because girls like you never do. You think you're standing beside genius. But one day, you'll wake up and realize you were standing beside a thief who only knows how to harmonize with whoever believes in him." She froze. Tears welled in her eyes. Henry turned toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear. She shook her head and stepped off the stage. For a long moment, he stood there alone, bathed in light, surrounded by silence. Then he said quietly, "You've made your point, Lorraine." I smiled, small and sad. "No, Henry. I've reclaimed mine." I turned and started down the aisle. Behind me, someone began clapping, slow, uncertain. Then another joined. And another. The sound grew, filling the sanctuary not with celebration but with recognition. Not applause for victory, but for truth, finally breaking through stained glass. Henry didn't move. The silver microphone hung limp in his hand, gleaming like gilt. For the first time, he looked small beneath it. When I reached the doors, I glanced back once. He was staring at the paper I'd left on the stage, his lips moving silently. Maybe a prayer. Maybe an excuse. I didn't wait to find out. Outside, the air was bright and cold. I could still hear the faint echo of clapping as I walked to my car. It sounded like thunder far away. A storm beginning, not ending. In the rearview mirror, St. Helena's steeple shimmered against the clouds. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving the house of God. I felt like I was walking back toward him, without an audience, without accompaniment, without Henry. I thought silence would follow that Sunday, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, heavy but clean. It didn't. It only changed shape. Within days, the whispers turned into headlines. Digital, cruel, relentless. A video surfaced first. Henry and Chloe sitting side by side in a bright studio, the camera angled just right to capture sympathy. He looked into the lens with that soft preacher's voice people loved so much. "We've been deeply hurt by false accusations," he said. "This has been a test of faith. We forgive those who are struggling and confused." Struggling and confused. That was me. The camera cut to Chloe, who clasped her hands like a choir girl praying for rain. "Mrs. Jacobs is going through some things," she whispered, eyes glistening. "We just ask everyone to pray for her healing." Healing. They'd turned theft into mercy, and me into a wounded woman begging for grace. The video spread faster than any sermon ever had. Members from St. Helena shared it with captions like, "So sad, let's pray for her." Others messaged me privately, "Lorraine, maybe take a break from music. It's making you bitter." By Friday, my inbox was full of canceled lessons. Parents who'd once begged me to teach their daughters now said they'd found other arrangements. One even added, "It's just the rumors. You understand." Yes, I understood. Reputation in a church town is a fragile song. One wrong note, and the choir stops singing with you. I tried to hold my head high at the grocery store, but I could feel the stares. People avoided my aisle like shame was contagious. Once, an old friend, Sister Maybelle, patted my hand and whispered, "You shouldn't have embarrassed him like that, honey. Men don't recover from public shame." "Neither do women," I said, but she'd already turned away. Soon I was asked, politely, officially, to step down from the church choir. The pastor called it a cooling period. He said it like weather, something temporary, something natural. But I could hear the lock clicking behind his words. "We just need to keep the peace, Lorraine. You understand?" "No," I told him. "Peace built on lies isn't peace. It's propaganda." He sighed, looked away, and whispered, "May the Lord guide your tongue." I almost laughed. My tongue was finally guided by truth. That night, I came home to find someone had slipped a note under my door. "Jealousy is not of God." No signature. Just ink, curling like poison ivy. I sat on the floor, the note in my hand, and for the first time since the confrontation, I felt something close to fear. Not fear of Henry. He had already taken everything he could, but fear of being erased completely. Because when enough people repeat a lie, it becomes a hymn. On social media, Faith and Love trended for days. Their duet had reached 100,000 views. Beneath the video, a comment caught my eye. "That poor old woman needs help. She's just jealous of their calling." Another wrote, "If you're truly Christian, you'd forgive." Forgive what? Forgive being rewritten? Forgive watching your own words fall from another woman's mouth while the world applauds? I scrolled until my eyes burned, then closed the laptop. The silence afterward was suffocating. I turned on the old cassette player, the same one that had been spinning our past for weeks, and pressed play. Henry's voice came through, young and hungry, singing Amazing Grace. But it didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like listening to a ghost haunting the body of a man still alive. That night, I dreamed of the silver microphone shattering. When I woke, the first light of dawn caught the glass case, throwing reflections all over the room, fragments of myself scattered across the walls. For days I stayed quiet, not because they silenced me, but because I was listening, really listening, to how lies move. They have rhythm. They travel faster than truth because they don't carry weight. They glide. But truth? Truth drags its feet through mud until it's too heavy to ignore. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Reverend Booker, an old gospel producer who'd once worked with me and Henry. His voice was low, cautious. "Lorraine, I don't know what's true or not, but someone's going around saying you're unstable. That you threatened Chloe. They showed people text messages, screenshots." "Screenshots?" "Yeah. Looked like you wrote some angry things." I hadn't. I don't even text fast enough to be angry. That was when I realized. This wasn't just gossip. It was a campaign. He was protecting his image, building a story where I was the villain. And it was working. Still, I didn't cry. You can't cry when you're busy observing. And I observed everything. Who reposted, who stayed silent, who suddenly forgot my number. Each betrayal had its own sound. The ping of a new message left unread, the click of a phone hanging up too soon, the quiet hum of isolation filling a once loud life. But beneath that hum, something else began to grow. A new kind of music. Not harmony, not melody, something sharper, a pulse, a plan. Because losing everything has a strange advantage. You stop caring what breaks next. I spend my evenings at the piano again, but not to mourn. To think. To remember. Every lie he told me came with a timestamp, a receipt, a note scribbled somewhere. I started gathering them. Old contracts, bank transfers, my journal entries, even the church bulletin from the day he claimed my song. Every page felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Meanwhile, the world kept spinning his way. Henry and Chloe booked interviews, sang at televised church events, even launched a fundraising website for disadvantaged youth. Every time their duet played on the radio, my stomach twisted. Not from pain anymore, but from disbelief that lies could echo so sweetly. One evening, I passed by the church and saw a banner hanging across the gate. Faith and Love Revival Tour, hosted by Henry Jacobs. My name used to be next to his on banners like that. Now, it was a footnote in gossip blogs. I walked closer, ran my fingers over the fabric letters. They were smooth, perfect, machine-cut, just like his lies. The next morning, I received another email. No subject line. Just a single sentence. "Stop before you embarrass yourself further." No signature, but I didn't need one. Henry never could resist the rhythm of threat disguised as kindness. I closed the laptop, sat in silence, and looked around the room. The walls that once echoed with choir rehearsals were now still. But I realized something. Silence wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my witness. They could slander me in public, but in private, I still had the truth. Printed, dated, recorded. And unlike their God-blessed facades, mine didn't need approval to exist. I began backing up every file from my old computer. Lyric drafts, recordings, even voice memos of Henry humming lines that were clearly mine. Proof that behind every stolen song was a woman who once believed in it too much. That night, as I labeled the folders, I whispered, "You can take my reputation, Henry." But I kept the receipts. Outside, thunder rolled, a low, rolling growl that rattled the window panes. The storm had been waiting its turn, and this time, it wasn't just weather. It was warning. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the computer screen. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Steady. Alive. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. It was a Tuesday morning when the message came. I was watering the small fern by the kitchen window, half distracted by the radio murmuring in the background, when my phone buzzed. From Carter. Old student, sound engineer now. Subject: "You need to see this." There was a link. Just a link. For a long moment, I didn't touch it. Experience had taught me that truth, once opened, can't be closed again. When I finally tapped it, the screen filled with the image of Henry and Chloe standing in front of a massive banner that read, FAI. Faith Betrayed, new album coming soon. The irony hit first. Faith betrayed. As if confession were now a marketing strategy, I scrolled down the article, breath shallow. Tracklist: Lie Sweetly. Grace Without Witness. Forgive the Silence. Heaven's Debt. The Light Knows My Name. I froze. Those titles weren't his. They were mine. Every single one. I'd written them over the years, in my private journal, never shared, never performed. They weren't even full songs yet. Just pieces, verses scribbled between grocery lists and prayers. No one else had ever seen them. Except Henry. My stomach turned cold. I rushed to my old desk, pulled out the bottom drawer, and grabbed the black leather notebook. Its spine was cracked, pages bent at the corners. I flipped through, scanning the headings. There they were, circled in blue ink, each one followed by fragments of lyrics and notes only I could decipher. And then the memory struck me like lightning. The hard drive. Years ago, when we built our home studio, I'd backed up my early song drafts on an external hard drive, labeled LJ Originals. When he moved to Texas, he said he'd take care of it, since the studio was being remodeled. I never saw it again. Now I knew where it was. They hadn't just stolen my voice. They'd stolen my unborn songs, the ones I'd never even finished. It wasn't plagiarism, it was resurrection without permission. They had turned my private grief into public worship. The first sob came quietly, without warning. Then another, louder, sharper. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, notebook clutched to my chest. But I wasn't crying because of loss. Not anymore. I was crying because I finally had proof. For months, Henry had painted me as unhinged, jealous, bitter, delusional. But now, the evidence was right there, in black and white, time-stamped and traceable. He hadn't just borrowed my music, he'd recorded it, using my words, my chords, my exact phrasing. I replayed Carter's message in my mind. He was careful, but I knew what he was hinting at. There were files, metadata, studio logs. I wasn't crazy. I was archived. I called him immediately. "Carter," I said, trying to steady my voice. "That link you sent? Did you look at the credits?" "Yeah," he replied. "They list Henry and Chloe as co-writers. But the file metadata on the promo tracks, Lorraine, your initials are all over them. LJ01, LJA02, are you sure?" "Positive. I used to label my mixes the same way you did. He must have copied them straight off your old drive." My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I asked Carter to send screenshots. He did. Each image showed the same pattern. My file names, my timestamps, even my old notes in the description tags. No amount of divine branding could erase that. When I hung up, I stared at the photos on my phone. There it was. Not revenge, not closure, but clarity. Henry had built his new empire on the bones of my drafts. And now, the foundation was cracked, visible, undeniable. For the rest of the day, I couldn't sit still. I kept pacing from the piano to the shelf, from the shelf to the window. The glass case holding the silver microphone caught my eye. For the first time, it didn't look like a tombstone. It looked like evidence waiting to testify. I opened the case, touched the cold metal. Its surface reflected my face, eyes swollen but fierce. "You'll speak again," I whispered. "But this time, you'll tell the truth." That evening, I called Carter back. "Can you help me recover the full files?" "Of course," he said. "But what are you planning?" "Nothing yet," I said, though I already knew. "I just want to hear how my words sound when someone else lies through them." He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Lorraine, maybe the Lord's giving you a way to clear your name." "No," I replied. "He's giving me a way to reclaim my song." That night, I played one of their leaked demos on my phone. Chloe's voice drifted through the speaker, delicate, hollow, singing my lyrics word for word. The light knows my name, even when men forget it. The irony was almost poetic. She didn't even know she was singing my confession. I let the song play until the end, then hit pause. Silence filled the room like breaths before revelation. The next morning, I called DJ Carter. He had been my student years ago. A shy boy who stuttered when he sang, but later found his rhythm behind soundboards and mixing consoles. Now he worked at a radio station downtown, producing gospel shows that reached half the South. When he picked up, his voice was warm but cautious. "Mrs. Jacobs, I was hoping you'd call." "You still got those files?" I asked. Every last one, he said. Backed up, time-stamped, unedited. Your initials are right there in the metadata. It's airtight. That word? Airtight. Felt better than any prayer I'd whispered in years. 2 hours later, I was standing in his studio. It smelled like old vinyl and coffee. Wires tangled everywhere, lights blinking softly like patient heartbeats. Carter had already pulled up the recovered files on the screen, neat rows labeled LG01, wave, LJ02.wave, and so on. My handwriting, translated into code, proof that memory could outlive betrayal if you recorded it right. Listen to this, Carter said, pressing play. The speakers crackled, then filled the room with my voice. My voice, unpolished but unmistakably mine. I heard the click of the piano pedal, the creak of the chair, my breath catching on the third line. Everything that made it real, everything Henry had tried to erase. We can clean the audio, Carter said. Enhance it. Embed digital timestamps. Once the press hears this, no one can claim you're lying. Don't clean it too much, I said. Leave the cracks. Let them hear what truth sounds like when it's still bleeding. He smiled softly. That's the Lorraine I remember. We spent hours piecing everything together, restoring, exporting, matching my lyrics to the stolen versions from Faith Betrayed. Side by side, it was undeniable. My melody, my words, my phrasing. His only contribution was the theft. When Carter finished syncing the files, he turned to me. What do you want to do with all this? Sue him? Take it to court? I shook my head. No. I'm not after money. I'm after truth, and truth doesn't need a lawyer, it needs a stage. He raised an eyebrow. You're going public. Yes, I said, but not with another accusation, with a song. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted the invitations. Simple, printed on plain white cardstock. Truth session. A night of honest voices. Hosted by Lorraine Jacobs. All proceeds will support the St. Helena Choir's Youth Scholarship Fund. Because truth deserves a microphone too. I mailed them to everyone, reporters, musicians, pastors, old friends, even the church board that had turned its back on me. Let them all come. Let them all listen. In the following days, Carter helped me record a short promo for the radio. They said she lost her faith. They said she lost her voice. But this Sunday night, Lorraine Jacobs will sing again, not to defend herself, but to tell the truth. We aired it 3 times a day. Each time I heard it, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from something sharper. Anticipation. The night before the event, I went through my closet looking for something to wear. Not the black dress I'd worn to confront Henry. That one still carried the weight of grief. Instead, I chose a soft white suit, simple and unadorned. I wanted to look like a blank page. Clean, ready to be rewritten on my own terms. On the piano, the silver microphone waited. I opened its glass case, uncoiled the cord and plugged it in. The click of the connector was satisfying, like a key turning in a long-locked door. I spoke into it, testing the sound. Testing, 1 truth, 2 truth. The echo filled the empty house, bouncing gently off the walls. For a second, I imagined the crowd, their faces, their doubt, their surprise, and Henry. Sitting somewhere, watching, unable to mute what was coming. Carter called to confirm last details. Venues ready. Equipment's checked. Press seats up front. You sure about the title, Truth Session? It's not just a title, I said. It's a sentence. He hesitated before asking. You sure you want to show your face, Mrs. Jacobs? After everything they've said? I laughed softly. Carter, if I keep hiding, who's going to sing the part of me he couldn't steal? The line went quiet for a moment, then he said, then let's make them listen. When we hung up, I sat down at the piano. The moonlight spilled across the keys like sheet music. I played the first few notes of Lie Sweetly. It still hurt, but the pain had rhythm now. It knew where to go. Before going to bed, I scribbled one last note in my journal. Tomorrow, I stop being a story told by others. Tomorrow, I sing my own testimony. And for the first time since Henry's betrayal, I slept without dreaming of him. Instead, I dreamed of a crowd in silence, of light spilling across a stage, of a woman standing before a microphone, her own. Breathing in, ready to tell the world what truth really sounds like. The night of truth session arrived like thunder that had been waiting too long to break. By 6 o'clock, the hall was already packed, pews full, aisles crowded, people standing shoulder to shoulder with cell phones ready. Some came out of curiosity. Some came out of guilt. Most came to see if the rumors were true, whether the woman they'd called unstable had truly lost her faith or finally found it. The banner above the stage was simple. Truth Session. Lorraine Jacobs. No verses, no sponsors, no hashtags. Just my name. Carter met me backstage, headset crooked, eyes wide with a mix of pride and nerves. "It's a full house," he said. "Even the pastor showed up. Henry's people, too." "Good," I said. "Let them witness." I wore the white suit I'd chosen the night before, plain, almost severe, and carried the silver microphone in my hands like an offering. Its weight was comforting now. Familiar. "Mine again." Carter tapped the mic and gave me a small nod. "You ready?" "For 3 years," I said. The lights dimmed. A low hum of conversation rolled through the audience. Then, the projector flickered to life. Across the screen appeared Henry and Chloe, the video of them singing "Lie Sweetly." The room hushed. Their voices filled the hall, smooth and sweet, harmonizing perfectly over a melody I knew too well. Henry looked radiant on screen. Confident. Magnetic. Chloe swayed beside him, eyes closed, her voice gliding over my lyrics like silk over stone. The audience smiled, some even swayed. And then the words, written by Henry Jacobs, appeared in the corner of the video. I waited until the last chord faded before I stepped out. My heels clicked once against the stage floor. Just one sound, but it sliced through the silence like a blade through cloth. Heads turned, phones tilted upward. A few gasps, a whisper of my name like a collective exhale. I stood center stage, the silver microphone gleaming in my hand. Behind me, the screen still showed Henry and Chloe frozen mid-smile. "Good evening," I said, my voice carried, steady, unhurried. "What you just heard was the version they sang." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. "And this," I lifted the microphone slightly, "is the voice of the woman who wrote it, long before they even knew how to play a C major chord." Carter, in the sound booth, gave me a silent thumbs up. I took a deep breath. The lights dimmed to a single spotlight. The piano started softly, my tempo, my key. And then I sang. The first note was fragile, trembling on the edge of breath. By the second, it steadied. By the third, it bloomed. Every line carried years of silence cracking open. Every lyric hit like confession and resurrection at once. "When you lie, lie sweetly." The hall grew still, no rustle, no whisper. Even the air felt tuned to me. Halfway through the verse, I could see tears glinting in the front row. By the time I reached the chorus, something in the room had changed. The lights brightened gradually, one by one, until the entire hall was glowing. Not stage light. Truth light. My voice didn't tremble anymore. It soared, unapologetic, filling the rafters, spilling into every corner like it had been waiting there all along. When I finished the final line, I held the note. Long, unwavering. Until I could feel my own heartbeat sinking with it. Then silence, not polite silence. Not uncertain. The kind of silence that feels like the world is recalibrating itself. I looked toward the audience. And that's when I saw him. Henry, 3 rows back. He wasn't smiling now. His jaw was tight, his eyes glassy. Chloe sat beside him, hands clasped so hard her knuckles whitened. I gestured toward Carter. He nodded, pressed a button. The speakers crackled. Then came another recording. Static, laughter. Then a man's voice fumbling through a melody. Henry's voice. Slightly off pitch, uncertain. "No, Henry," my voice echoed faintly in the background, years younger. "That's not how it goes." Try it again. From the bridge. The audience listened, rapt. Carter played the next clip. Henry humming my lyrics, my piano in the background, me correcting him. Gently, patiently, lovingly. There was no denying it. The authorship was alive in every syllable, every sigh. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Lord, have mercy." Another whispered, "She taught him everything." Chloe stood abruptly. Her chair clattered backward, echoing through the hall. She covered her face and ran for the exit. The door banged shut behind her. Henry didn't move. His head was bowed, one hand covering his mouth. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Henry Jacobs," I said evenly. "You don't owe me an apology." "Lorraine?" he started, voice cracking. "No," I said. "Don't speak. You've said enough for both of us." I turned to the crowd. All I ever wanted was for truth to have its turn at the microphone. Tonight, it finally did. Someone began to clap, hesitant at first, then stronger. Another joined. Then another. Soon, the entire hall erupted, not in cheers, but in something deeper. Recognition. The sound washed over me, warm and relentless. It wasn't applause for talent. It was vindication. I lifted the microphone again. "I don't need anyone to apologize," I said. "I just need you to know. My music never betrayed me. Only the man who sang it did." The words landed like a verdict. I placed the microphone gently on the piano, its silver surface gleaming beneath the stage light. The noise swelled. Clapping, shouting, the shuffling of people standing to their feet. Henry rose slowly, eyes on me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. For the first time, he wasn't a performer. He was a man caught between the truth and the echo of his own lies. I turned away before he could find the words. This wasn't his stage anymore. Carter joined me on stage, his hand light on my shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending I couldn't." We left the video playing on the screen, my old studio clips rolling over the crowd. The audience stayed seated, watching as the evidence spoke for itself. Time-stamped files, lyric sheets, notebook scans, even bank receipts. Each image was another nail in the coffin of the lie he'd built. Outside, rain had started, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof in rhythm with my heartbeat. It sounded like applause from heaven. When the lights finally dimmed, the people began to leave in silence. No gossip, no questions. Just quiet awe, the kind that follows revelation. I stood there a while longer, watching the empty seats. The air still shimmered with the echo of the last note I'd sung. It felt sacred. Before leaving, I looked one last time at the silver microphone resting on the piano. For years, it had been the weapon used against me. Tonight, it became my witness. I whispered to it, "You did your job. You told the truth." As I turned toward the exit, I caught a final glimpse of Henry still seated near the back, head in his hands. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. The music had already spoken for me. Outside, Carter held the door open. The rain hit my face. Cool, clean, honest. It washed away the last traces of fear. I didn't turn around when I stepped off the stage. The applause was still echoing through the hall, but it no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the truth, finally free after years of captivity. Outside, the night air hit me like baptism. Rain was falling in sheets, soft at first, then heavier, until it drowned out every leftover thought of shame. I walked across the parking lot without an umbrella, my heels splashing through shallow puddles. The city lights blurred, gold and silver bleeding together on the wet pavement. Behind me, I could still hear the faint hum of voices. People lingering, whispering, rethinking everything they thought they knew. I stopped beneath the awning and lifted the silver microphone in my hands. Raindrops slid across its surface, tracing the engraved initials that once meant us. Now, under the streetlight, those letters gleamed differently. Mine. For years, I had wiped this microphone clean of fingerprints that weren't mine. Tonight, I let the rain do it for me. It hissed softly against the metal, washing away the dust of memory. "You're not his anymore," I whispered. "You never were." The sound of thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady, like applause from a sky that had been listening all along. I looked up and let the rain hit my face, not flinching this time. Each drop felt like an answer. Carter appeared behind me, holding a jacket over his head. "Mrs. Jacobs," he called, "you'll get soaked." "I already am," I said, laughing softly. "And it feels good." He smiled, then stepped beside me, watching the water collect around our feet. "They'll talk about tonight for a long time," he said. "Let them," I replied. "It's about time they talked about the right woman." We stood in silence for a while. The neon sign from the building flickered on the wet ground. "Truth." Session reflected upside down. It looked almost like a question. Carter finally spoke again. "What will you do now?" I looked at the microphone in my hand. The light from the sign danced on its curve, glowing faintly. "Keep singing," I said. But this time, not for redemption, for release. He nodded, understanding more than my words could say. "You know," he said, "that mic after tonight, it's not just a symbol. It's evidence of survival." "No," I smiled. "It's a witness. And witnesses tell the story even when no one asks them to." He chuckled, then offered to walk me to my car. I shook my head. "Go on, Carter. I'll take the long way home." When he left, I lingered a little longer in the rain. The world smelled different, like wet asphalt and freedom. Every sound seemed new: the slap of tires on the street, the hum of a streetlight, even the rhythmic drip of rain from the gutters. All of it blended into something that wasn't music yet but might be, someday. I walked toward the bus stop, shoes squelching with each step. The city was nearly empty. Just me, the rain, and the faint echo of my own performance replaying in my head. I thought about Henry sitting in that hall, his face buried in his hands. I wondered if he was praying, regretting, or simply calculating the next lie. But it didn't matter anymore. For the first time in years, his silence wasn't my responsibility. When the bus arrived, I climbed aboard and sat by the window. The glass was foggy, the reflection faint. I could barely see myself, and somehow that was comforting. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who used to wait by the phone, listening for an apology. She looked older, yes, but lighter. As the bus rumbled through downtown, I pressed the microphone to the glass and watched the raindrops slide down both sides, outside and in. It reminded me of the divide between truth and the version people prefer to believe. Transparent, fragile, yet unbreakable once you stop wiping it clean for others. When I reached my stop, the rain had softened into mist. The streetlights flickered through it like candles in fog. I walked the final blocks home, humming softly to myself. A new melody, one without words yet. Something honest, something only I could recognize. Inside the house, the air was still and familiar. The clock ticked on the wall. Same rhythm as always, but it sounded different now, like accompaniment instead of confinement. I placed the silver microphone back on the piano. The light from the window hit it just right, scattering into a dozen reflections. For a moment, the entire room shimmered. I sat down and pressed a single key, middle C. The note rang out, pure, steady, echoing off the glass. No ghosts answered. No harmonies followed. Just me. I smiled. Maybe the truest freedom isn't silence or applause. It's knowing your voice doesn't need permission to exist. Before turning off the lamp, I looked once more at the microphone. It gleamed faintly in the dark, not as a relic of love or loss, but as proof that I had lived, sung, and survived. A year passed. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like the hum of a metronome keeping time for a new song. The storm that had once surrounded my name finally faded. Henry's album disappeared quietly after the truth session. Chloe retired from music. St. Helena found a new choir director, younger, softer, eager to avoid my name in conversation. And I, for the first time in my life, didn't care to be mentioned. Instead, I built something new. At the corner of Auburn and Vine, there used to be an abandoned photography studio, cracked windows, Dust layered thick on the floors, a faint smell of varnish and rain. I rented it, scrubbed it clean, and painted the sign myself. True Voice Atelier. Not academy. Not studio. Atelier. A workshop for rebuilding what the world breaks. The first day it opened, only 3 women showed up. All of them were over 50. All of them carried stories in their throats they didn't know how to tell. There was May, who hadn't sung since her husband told her her voice sounded like complaining. Dorothy, who used to hum in the hospital corridors where she cleaned floors at night. And Reverend Eloise, a retired preacher who'd lost her pulpit when she stopped agreeing with her congregation's men. I asked them to sit in a circle. No sheet music, no microphones, no pretense. Just breath and truth. We're not here to sound perfect, I told them. We're here to sound real. That first session was quiet, hesitant. Voices cracked. Laughter followed. Then tears. And then, something changed. Each note, each shaky vowel, each imperfect tone felt like an act of resurrection. By the 3rd week, we had 10 women. By the 3rd month, 20. Some came just to sit and listen. Others brought songs scribbled on napkins. All of them carried silence like old jewelry, worn, heavy, inherited. And one by one, they began to take it off. On the far wall, I hung a glass case. Inside, the silver microphone. Its reflection gleamed softly in the afternoon light. Below it, engraved on a small brass plate, were the words, "Stolen once. Sung again." Whenever new students came, someone would always ask, "What's the story behind that microphone?" And I'd smile. It used to belong to a man who forgot who taught him to sing. But now, it belongs to every woman who remembers herself. They'd laugh, not realizing how literal that was. One day, during our weekly session, a student, Anita, 62, soft-spoken, raised her hand timidly. "Miss Lorraine," she asked, "do you ever listen to his music anymore?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned toward me. Even the air seemed to wait for the answer. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Yes," I said, "every now and then." "Doesn't it hurt?" she whispered. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But pain isn't the enemy. Forgetting is." I listened to remind myself, forgiveness isn't silence. She nodded, and someone exhaled audibly, like the truth had just unclenched their chest. That night, after everyone left, I stayed in the studio alone. The sunset poured through the big front windows, staining the walls orange. The silver microphone caught the light again, scattering it like shattered glass. I sat at the piano and played a new melody. Something softer, slower. Not a lament, not a hymn. Something in between. A conversation between who I was and who I'd become. As I played, I thought of Henry. Where was he now? Maybe still leading choirs somewhere, maybe preaching forgiveness to people who'd never met the version of him I knew. Maybe he even believed his own lessons now. But it didn't matter. He no longer lived rent-free in my melody. Once, I used to think the worst part of betrayal was the moment it happened. But the truth is, the worst part comes after, when you start to wonder if it defined you. It doesn't. Survival does. And creation, that's the closest thing to resurrection we ever get in this life. Months passed, and the True Voice Atelier became a kind of refuge. We hosted small concerts, not polished performances, just open nights where women told their stories through music. We called it Healing in C Major. Every show ended with the same line projected on the wall behind us. "If they took your song, write another." People started donating instruments, offering scholarships, recording our sessions. One day, Carter brought over a local radio crew. They interviewed me for a short feature. "Mrs. Jacobs," the reporter asked, "after everything that happened, do you believe in redemption?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Redemption isn't something you wait for," I said. "It's something you build note by note until you recognize your own sound again." She smiled. "And what does freedom sound like?" I looked at the women rehearsing behind me, laughing, off-key, alive. "It sounds like them," I said. "The day we hit our first anniversary, The women surprised me. They gathered in the studio early, baking a lopsided cake shaped like a microphone. On top, in shaky icing letters, it read, "Our true voice." They sang Amazing Grace for me. Our own version, slower, filled with pauses that weren't mistakes but memories. When they reached the line, "I once was blind," I felt tears slide down my cheeks. Not from sorrow, from recognition. The circle had closed. After they left, I stood before the glass case again. The silver microphone glowed faintly under the lamplight. I pressed my fingers to the glass. "We made it," I whispered. "You and me." I thought about how many years I'd spent waiting for someone to validate my truth. And how, in the end, I didn't need validation, only volume. That night, before locking up, I wrote one more line on the brass plate beneath the microphone. Stolen once, sung again, forever owned by her. Then, I turned off the lights. Through the dark glass window, I could still see the faint reflection of the microphone, glowing softly, like it was still listening. And maybe it was. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still play Henry's old recordings. Not to grieve, not to gloat, just to remember how far I've come. When his voice cracks on the bridge, I catch myself smiling. He never did learn how to hit that note. I used to correct him. Now I let it ring imperfect. It's not my problem anymore. Forgiveness isn't silence. Forgiveness is learning to hear the wrong note and choosing not to fix it. These days, new students come and go. Young, old, tired, hopeful. Every time one of them asks, "Miss Lorraine, do you think I still have a voice left?" I tell them, "If you're asking that question, then yes, it's still in there. You just stopped listening." And then we start. One breath. One note. One truth at a time. Sometimes, I still catch myself whispering to the silver microphone before class starts. It's silly, maybe, but it feels like prayer. "Thank you," I tell it, "for teaching me that even the broken instrument can still carry a whole song." The rain has long stopped falling, but I can still hear its rhythm in the way we sing. A little offbeat, but real. And every time I step into that studio, I know this isn't where my story ends. It's where it began to sound like me again. The studio lights are warm tonight, softer than they used to be. No glare. No glare. Just a circle of light wrapping around me, like a quiet halo that doesn't ask to be holy. Carter adjusts the camera, gives me a thumbs up from behind the lens. The red light flickers on. This time, I don't flinch. I take a breath, the same way I teach my students, deep from the diaphragm, with intention. The microphone in front of me isn't for singing now. It's for testimony. I look straight into the lens. If one day, I begin slowly, you hear the voice of someone who once broke your heart, playing on a station you didn't choose, in a song you didn't write, don't turn off the radio. I pause. Let the silence breathe between us. Don't give them that kind of power. Let the world hear what you hear. Let them know that a melody can be stolen, but the soul behind it can't be replaced. The words roll out. Steady. Low, certain. Not rehearsed, just remembered. You might think your voice doesn't matter anymore. That it's too old, too tired, too late. But let me tell you something. The world is starving for honesty, and no one can sing your truth but you. I glance toward the glass case behind me. The silver microphone sits there, gleaming softly under the studio light, the inscription catching the glow. Stolen once. Sung again. It used to haunt me. Now it keeps me company. I used to think forgiveness meant silence, I continue. That if I stayed quiet long enough, people would see the truth on their own. They didn't. Lies are louder than silence until you choose to outsing them. The camera zooms closer. I can see my reflection in the lens, older, lined, but unafraid. So sing, I say, even if your voice shakes. Even if no one believes you at first. Even if they call you bitter for refusing to disappear. My voice softens. Because someone out there, right now, is letting another person perform the song that should have been theirs. Someone's watching their story play out in someone else's key, and they don't know they're allowed to take it back. I lean forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady. Share this story. Not because it's mine, but because it might be yours. Maybe you're not a singer. Maybe your stolen song is a dream, a name, a piece of faith someone convinced you wasn't worth keeping. Take it back, rewrite it, reclaim it. The lights hum softly. I can almost hear the quiet rhythm of my own heart syncing with the moment. We don't get to choose who betrays us, I say, but we get to choose what echoes afterward. I think of my students. May, Dorothy, Reverend Eloise. Their voices filling that old studio like wind through broken windows, rough and real and radiant. None of them came to be perfect singers. They came to stop being silent. So, if this story found you, I say, maybe it's because your voice is still waiting to be heard. Don't hide behind someone else's harmony. Step into your own verse. I let out a small breath, smiled gently at the camera. And if you ever doubt whether you can start over, remember this. I was once a woman whose song was stolen. Tonight, I am the woman who wrote a new one. The red recording light flickers once, steady. Carter's signals were almost done. But I have one last thing to say. Air this story, I whisper. Because somewhere, someone's letting another person sing for their soul, and they don't know they still have a voice. I lean back, my smile soft but certain. Maybe this isn't an ending at all. Maybe it's just the first song that truly sounds like me. The light fades. The camera clicks off. But even after the silence settles, I can still feel it. The vibration in my chest. The quiet truth that hums beneath every word. My story may be ending here, but maybe, just maybe, this is the first song that ever carried my true voice.